any further questions, I think there were two major points that we discussed in terms of what we take with us and what resonated a bit in our little heads. One is the fact that, yes, we understand in order for an evaluation to be strategic, you have to prioritize certain questions, but we also saw that the reality, even though many people know this, the reality still looks quite different in most of the cases that we could think of. But still people try to cover everything in an evaluation.
Yes.
And the other thing is, do you want to?
No, you can.
The other thing is on indicators as well. Kind of people are aware that indicators are not always the best way to measure things, but still there are the back donor requests. There are back donors that ask you to provide this quantitative information. There are time constraints. Sometimes there are constraints in terms of individual capacities and expertise that you would need in order to really be clear on biases that indicators have. So we do see the point of doing it in that way, but the reality often is quite different from the ideal. That's what we're discussing.
So sort of so it's a question of ideal versus reality.
Yeah.
Okay. What about you? Have you come up with some questions or some takeaways?
I think there's a derivation with a question that has to do with we want to establish whether impact theory of change is primarily interested in outcome or impact. That is, for instance,
I'm sorry, whether the theory of change is
primarily interested in outcome or impact.
Okay.
That answers your question. And we have a few things to take home from this workshop. One has to do with the strategic, how to design strategic plan to carry out an effective evaluation.
How to
design strategic plan
to
carry out effective evaluation.
Okay.
So the next one is asking the right questions.
Yes.
To get the right answers for proper evaluation.
Okay. Okay. Anything else on that table?
No.
And what about you guys here?
We had some interesting sort of pickups, takeaways.
I think we certainly agreed on that the importance of the TAP of change, and also to do this at the before, at the start of the program rather than leaving it to later, and also the importance of baselines, also for evaluations. And then we had some divergent discussions about the complementarity of monitoring and evaluation, perhaps, like for example, one critical question maybe still is to what extent we digressed a little. My takeaway was that I felt reconfirmed by what you said, that it's not very useful to have outcome impact indicators. And I think you didn't agree with this. So we have some digression there perhaps.
Okay.
And that's still a question perhaps to be resolved or not, maybe cannot be resolved. What do you think? Do you want to add to this?
And we also thought that the work in the afternoon about the list of things that can go wrong would be a very useful and practical step with donors before issuing the money or issuing the second tranche, to ensure in the contract for that next tranche that there would be the need to use evaluator to make sure that those mistakes or errors hadn't shown up, and there would need to be a proof of that before the next tranche was paid, and that would go into the contracts for the payment. So that was a nice, as an annexure of things to check out for.
Okay.
Risk mitigation.
Here I was wondering whether this not contradicts maybe what you said earlier about the control, or how does this fit then with control versus improvement, etc. That there is perhaps a conflict between those dimensions.
Yeah, we had a discussion, something you said earlier about, given the fact that an adverse evaluation can hurt people's feelings, you know, and you said, well, you know, be nice. And I raised the unlikelihood that the taxpayer would be very happy to hear that the effectively waste of money was being condoned. So yeah, it was a question of, you know, sort of what's the proper approach when you see waste of money, waste of time. If the project is to save lives, do you tolerate behaviour that leads to death? You know, sort of. So yeah. So what is the right response? What is the right response to project failure?
Okay, that's a great point, and I think by raising the question, I think you've already answered it. I mean, I like to think that I take a constructive approach to evaluations, which I do to try to engage a stakeholder, get them bought into it, you know, if there's difficult findings, try to engage them and show them what's there, but ultimately our job is to tell the truth. Now the question is, you know, how do you do this? Most cases, maybe your experience is different, it's not so much that the program is, you know, it's, you know, in our cases, the programs are corrupt, in which case you gotta identify that. I think it's very tricky from an evaluation perspective. Auditors are better at that, but evaluators can do that too. But, you know, often it's just that things aren't really designed very well and the program isn't working as well as it should be, and it can make some changes and improvements. In that kind of case, how you present the findings and information can have as much effect on what happens as what you say. And this is part of the utilization focus where you engage people in it and drip feed them findings as you go along. I mean, an appreciative inquiry approach can be very helpful. An appreciative inquiry, what it does is it's fairly new to evaluation. It comes more from organizational development, but basically it's been used in organizational development where everything else has failed. You got organizations, different groups don't even talk to each other, won't look the other way when they walk past. And it's a technique for looking, no matter how bad things are, there's something positive. And looking for whatever positive there is, however small, and looking how it can be magnified. So it's rephrasing questions. Instead of saying, you know, the problems are this, we'll say certain things work right under these conditions, and sort of building upon the positives. And it's a change in mindset, which can be very, very helpful in really getting people engaged and in coming up with some really good information about what can be done. And getting people to buy into the process. And often works when other things don't. It work well in complex situations where you have different parts of organizations who are fighting, and you get them to at least agree upon some commonalities. Because you focus on whatever positives there might be, and there's always some positives. Now, I mean, you have a situation, say, where the program is killing people or not helping people. Yeah, you need to point that out somehow. And the question is how you point it out to, and you know,
the big challenge is when your client is the criminal. When your client is the agency that has run away with the money.
Yep.
You know.
Well, I mean, I have a friend and colleague who in Canada did a organizational review of this is a home for older people where there was an abnormally high death rate, and she pointed out quite a few problems there, and they went and sued her for $5 million. Mind you, they sued everyone else as well, because hers wasn't the only study which pointed this thing out. But, you know, you can run into that sort of situation, and it can raise some ethical questions. You know, what if it's your employer who's part of the problem? And what is your obligation as an evaluator? Now, this raises, you know, the evaluation community raises questions about how independent evaluation should be. And development banks, like in some other organizations, like their evaluation departments to report not to the president but to the board of directors to provide for complete independence from management, to provide the ability to speak the truth to power, so to speak, to really point out some things which management may not want to hear. works that has some advantages and some disadvantages. The disadvantage is you end up being so far removed that you take an adversarial position to it, or you perceive that way. The positive is that you do have the clout to be able to decide what questions to ask. You can ask difficult questions if need be, like, our lives being lost, and that you can ultimately say the truth. So, how independent is your evaluation function? Now, many of you are running evaluation functions, are responsible for evaluation functions in your government. So these aren't things you're necessarily stuck with. And I think those goes back to the point you made here about, well, sounds very good in theory, but here's the reality. You could create your own reality. You can too. I mean, you're head of evaluation in an organization where, you got some competing pressures, but you could make the point that these are the kind of questions we should be answering. I know it's not going to be a quantitative number unless you want 42, but it will be convincing data. We can identify possible alternative explanations which are credible. We can provide evidence which suggests they're very unlikely and this is what's happening. And you can create the kind of alternative situation. When dealing with what donors demand, that's a different problem. And got to educate the donors. And you're not going to get away from indicators because I still want them. But I've given you some ideas about how you can provide indicators in such a way that at least they won't be misused and maybe can even be helpful. And so they can be made useful. So you have a lot more power and authority than you think you do. You're not stuck with the way things are at. Now, about the theory of change, if that was a question, it's not looking just at impact, it's looking across the whole shebang. It's really being strategic about how you're getting from starting out with your resources, your inputs, to across the whole spectrum to ultimately how you're going to save the world and make the world a better place. Or maybe not quite that far, but how to result in better health outcomes or better educational outcomes or less poverty or whatever. And you can look at many steps along the line, and some of your early steps, it could suggest it's premature for meaningful impact. Meaningful evaluation of looking at outcomes, because the program's just gotten started. But you can do look at some process things. Some indicators might be useful right there, and then suggest some later questions at a later date. So it can help you focus on where you should focus on. And very often it's not impact, and it's a program can just set it up for failure if you try to assess its impact before it's had a chance to get established. And we tend to underestimate that. I mean, there's this story apparently true of a program in the States which is supposed to address teenage pregnancy. It was expected to show some outcomes after 6 months. Well, you need a bit more time for that. But, establishing, that's pretty obvious, but think of other examples. Establishing a project in a rural area, just to hire staff, find office space, get people oriented, make contacts. That could take years, sometimes 2 years, before you start actually doing anything and producing any value, and this is almost always underestimated. So you can build some of these things into your theory of change. You can help make things more meaningful, and you can show how you can be helpful to people. In terms of, I'm not sure if this was a question or a takeaway, but a strategic plan for evaluation, how to do that. Again, being strategic means starting with the right kind of question. And then, here's the question, issues which needs addressing, here's the priorities. And secondarily, look at the methods. This is backwards of how it's usually done. And it isn't always a gigantic evaluation to be strategic. Sometimes it is. And it will tend to be a bit larger in scale because you're asking bigger questions than a very small operational thing. But not always. Sometimes if you ask the big questions, it doesn't take a lot to tell you whether you're in the right direction or not, at the very least. But you want to start with the questions and then develop the methods. And that's the key to being strategic. And there's going to be pressures around the way, going to subvert you. But I think even some of the models you're developing, it's too easy to look at outputs because they're nice and easy and measurable. But if they're not important things, then, I mean, it's like the story, where, some guy is looking around, light posts in the dark, and someone else comes up to him and says, what's happening? Is he gonna help you? He says, I dropped my keys. So he's looking around, helping him, he doesn't see anything, and after a while he says, do you remember where you dropped them? He says, oh yeah, it was over there. But then why are you looking here? Well, the light's better here. Well, I mean, it's like using the wrong method for the question, but it's an easier method to implement. It's not gonna really help. So I think that's the important message. A lot of this you have under control. You will have to make compromises, but hey, that's life, right? So, are there any other questions we haven't addressed? Decision makers want simple answers. Give them a little bit more, give them the simple answer they want, but qualify it and put it in the context, and get them intrigued, if you will, about why this is. Give them a simple indicator and then all sorts of breakdowns, so they wonder, maybe I do need to know a bit more, maybe this is a bit more complex than that. You tell the performance story, there's good documentation for why that's useful. Using your quantitative data and other data sources. I think we talked about various strategies for facilitating greater use, and key to that is asking questions which people care about and involving them in the process. And there's different stakeholders who may have different kind of questions, and you say some taxpayers may be interested in one thing, and the community members may be interested in something different, and it may be difficult reconciling them, at least be aware of that. And I think we talked about the relationship between monitoring and evaluation, how we can move more from monitoring and evaluation, is show it, demonstrate the value of evaluation. It's hard to get started, but you can start with an evaluation, pick one, and hopefully you're gonna come up with something positive so people will like it, and you can demonstrate how it's valuable. That's how you get people more interested in doing more. And then outcomes book basically suggests a strategy like that. You look for champions, people who are interested, and show how it can be useful, so it's not all theoretical. And I think we shared some of our practices. We're talking about the big picture and how evaluation can make a difference. If you could show how programs and strategies could be more effective, address the right kind of questions, the right kind of needs, the right kind of issues, then evaluation is making a difference. Maybe it's a bit hard to say that the world's a safer place because of what you've done. That's a bit too far along the theory of change, the linear logic model along the chain of events, but at least you're making some contribution there. And we shouldn't be too modest about that when we can do that. Even influencing what programs do, if they can operate 1 iota a little bit better because of something we've done, we've been useful. And that's why we're there, otherwise there's no point to evaluation. Because evaluation has no use, no intrinsic value in and of itself. It's only useful if it can help be used in some way, help influence better thinking, better progress, better strategies. And I think we talked a bit, not enough about the interaction among initiatives, but the first thing is be explicit, identify those other ones. And I showed you at least a couple models which do point out different things perhaps can interact, and so if you identify that, then at least you can ask the right kind of questions. And long-term changes versus short-term evaluations, climate change, how do you grow a tree from an acorn, how long do you wait? Try to identify, using the theory of change, to identify some intermediate steps which can be measurable, observable, and to the extent you can do that, and see if you're progressing along the chain. So, again, as I say, evaluation, monitoring are designed to support a focus, to helping to make a difference, helping to think strategically. They're not ends in themselves. And you're focused on the question rather than the method. And just before concluding, if you have any other questions, if, I know the copies you're given of these resources are hard to read, if you want better copies of those or of other resources, you have my email, or if not, you can grab one of my cards. The email's on the front and back slide of the presentation you have, so please don't hesitate to contact me, and thank you for your attention and for your cooperation.